Well, I think the intro's over. Dara, talk. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear, sir.
There we go. Assuming we can actually hear callers, then that's fine. I couldn't hear the intro music at all. Welcome everybody to the Sunday show. It's January 12th, 2025. If you're watching us live, and if you're not watching us live, I have no idea what time it is, and I have no idea what time zone you're in. You could be aliens having unearthed archival video of the last remnants of the human species. And if so, let me tell you, you couldn't have picked a better thing to pluck out and explore and investigate, because this is a live call-in show where other human beings can call in and defend their beliefs that we probably don't accept. Things like gods, devils, demons, claims about supernatural events, which I don't see that we have any way to explore it at all. Not everybody is equipped and ready to have these conversations, and that's fine. If you stumble over stuff or you can't give a good reason, or if we have a problem with your reason, it can end in a number of different ways. One thing we definitely need theists to call in and say, here's what I believe and why, or people who believe in other things that we don't, to say, here's what I believe and why. If you have some esoteric belief, and I guess I shouldn't say esoteric, if you have some personal God concept that doesn't align with what the majority of people believe, or if it is an absolutely useless proposition, like the universe is God and it doesn't care what we believe, cool. Congratulations, keep it to yourself. It doesn't fit here. It has no impact on our lives. If you are one of those people who are like, I believe in God just because God privately revealed itself to me, you could probably still call in and explain what you mean by that sort of private revelation and what you think others should think about that. Like, should we be convinced because God revealed himself to you? How would we know? How would we tell? Lots of good potential. Brian's calling from Illinois. Pronouns are he, him. And Brian's a theist who says the Humanist Manifesto is terribly stupid. And so, Brian, I guess I'd ask, which version of the Humanist Manifesto do you think is stupid?
Well, I've read all three of them, and they're all terribly stupid. But I want to. Can we summarize from our last conversation that I had with both you guys on Wednesday? I think it was. Is that I need to preface it with the fact that we talked about, like I said, you need to have like a basis for logic and reason. And you disagreed, and then it's kind of funny because I gave you a mathematical equation of how there's like half man, half women, and that shows that mathematically, one man, one woman is a perfect mathematical equation for a relationship, and then you disagree with me. But it's fine if you disagree with me, but I was actually proving the point that you can come up with different ideologies and come up with different basis for logic and different equations for logic. If you import different variables into your logical equation, you'll come up with different outcomes.
Yeah, Brian, what you're saying doesn't make any sense. What would you like to talk about with regard to the Humanist Manifesto?
Well, I mean, we could talk. What does it like? For example, I would like to understand this from the Humanist Manifesto. Is one of them is working to benefit society maximizes individual happiness. Now, what is happiness? That is like a meaningless statement, because what makes you happy...
No, it's so sad. It's so sad, Brian, that you don't know what happiness is. That explains why you're so confused, why you call in and don't make any sense. I genuinely hope that you find a way to experience happiness, because it would be, It would be very nice. I don't.
No,
Have
that's,
you,
I'll
it's
explain if you let
wild.
me explain.
It's wild that, like, you might be the first person. There are people who call in on occasion who are like, a particular version of nihilist and are, despondent about things. But even those people seem to understand and know what happiness is, and they've experienced. How old are you now, Brian, that you haven't experienced happiness?
No, but I would agree with you, and that's actually my point. Is that
No, Brian,
what makes you happy?
Brian, my question is, how old are you? Because I want to know how old somebody can get to without experiencing happiness.
I've experienced nothing but happiness in my life.
So wait, no. Now I'm confused, Brian, because you went from saying you don't know what happiness is to say you've experienced nothing but happiness in your life. So you've never been sad?
I'm sorry. I was trying to explain something. Is that
I'm sorry. I really wish you'd focus on answering the question that I asked. Have you ever been sad?
Sure.
Then
I just
how
said,
is that consistent?
Sadness.
How is that consistent with your claim that you've experienced nothing but happiness?
I would agree with you. I misspoke. I'm saying I've experienced mostly
So you've
happiness.
experienced happiness.
Yes.
Then why did you pretend like you didn't know what happiness was?
No, that I never said I don't know what happiness is. I said that
you said what is happiness. You said what is happiness.
Yes.
You're the one who's derailed this. You're the one who's derailed this entire conversation into focusing on what happiness is. On what happened. You're right. I'm not letting you. Oh my God, Brian's starting to get a little smarter. He's figuring out what I'm not letting him do. I'm not letting him waste my fucking time.
Oh, no, I'm not wasting your time. I'm saying
yes, you are. You are absolutely wasting my time, just like you were when you did your psychobabble, completely incoherent statements about if you inject these into your logic and blah blah blah, and it needs a grounding, and there's 50% man and 50% woman, and your logical fallacies there about what goes together, and now you want to talk about the Humanist Manifesto. And so I asked you what your objection is.
It's actually garbage.
Why don't you stop talking? Why don't you stop talking while I'm talking?
You're the one that talks nonstop. You have a talking show that you...
Yeah, you know why? Because I have a call-in show where I'm interested in talking to reasonable, intelligent people. Please demonstrate, Brian, that you are reasonable and intelligent.
Okay, so what I was trying to say is that happiness to you...
No, I'm sorry. Brian, you're not listening and you're not learning. This is really frustrating. Does it hurt being as confused as you are, that you are incapable of learning how to actually have a conversation? You called in to say the Humanist Manifesto is terribly stupid. I'm going to take you off hold. And when I do, the only thing I want to hear from you is the Humanist Manifesto is terribly stupid because, and then give the reason. Here we go.
Because happiness is different to many different people. For example, what makes me happy would most likely not make you happy. And what makes you happy most likely does not make me happy. What makes Dara happy most likely does...
I'm sorry, but we've discovered what your entire problem is, Brian, and that is that in much the same way that the last time you called, you focused on what the title of the show was, when that's really just clickbait fodder to get people interested and doesn't direct the show. You have no ability to think beyond the extreme literal in a narrow scope. And that's why you think that 50% men and 50% women tells you something useful other than what the normative distribution is. Similarly, you think that when the Humanist Manifesto talks about increasing happiness, that this is a problem because what makes you happy might not make me happy. But do you think that the people who wrote the Humanist Manifesto had never thought of that?
It's apparent because all of this is nonsense. It's a word salad of garbage.
Okay, goodbye.
Like, tell me.
Goodbye. No, Brian, I'm done speaking to you. Don't bother calling back. On any show that I'm on, I've taken notes of your actual phone number because The Humanist Manifesto, there are 3 versions of it, and I don't agree with everything in all the various versions of that, but it was the Humanist Manifesto 2, the second one, is probably my favorite version. It was written by Paul Kurtz and Edwin Wilson. It is definitely not nonsense and word salad. It is a rejection of theism. It is a statement about positions on human rights and contraception, abortion, weapons of mass destruction, all kinds of things are covered in there. It is not in the ballpark of word salad. But this is the 3rd or 4th call from you, I think. And you fail to make any sense or demonstrate that you even understand the basics of the basics. And so you called in to talk about the Humanist Manifesto, which you want to dismiss as nonsense and garbage. I'd be happy to go through the Humanist Manifesto, but you don't even know which version. You're like, one of the versions says something about happiness. The reality, Brian, is that when it talks about human happiness, human flourishing, it's not in any way saying that if what makes you happy is killing everybody, we're going to make you happy. It is speaking in broad generalities, in the same way that when somebody says, hey, how are you feeling? And you say, I'm happy, you don't have to continue from there, because whatever made you happy is independent from the fact that you experienced happiness. And we know a great many things about what generally makes humans happy. Not being sick, not being slaves, not being broke and poor and despondent. Avoiding those circumstances is the beginning of happiness. This isn't about a simple hedonistic, let's do whatever makes everybody happy, because the people who put that together are way smarter than you. And I mean that in the sense that they spent a lot of time thinking about these things, and they didn't just write together a manifesto saying, you know what, this will sound really good, Dara. We should just make everybody happy. Let's have that as a goal. Let's make everybody happy.
Yeah, I think if we're being really charitable, and I mean really charitable, where Brian is intending to go, if I could be permitted to speak on his behalf for a moment,
why not?
Is some kind of a meta-ethical critique, some kind of a critique of secular morality, some kind of a critique which seeks to undermine the meta-ethical foundations on an atheist worldview or something like that. And that's a potentially extremely interesting topic. It just seems, in the politest way possible, that Brian isn't really equipped to have that conversation. His analysis doesn't go beyond cheap assertions about how this is garbage and that is garbage and so on. And so, it's not really possible to have a fruitful dialogue with somebody like that, is it?
Let me, just for fun, I'm going to read from Humanist Manifesto 2. And when it was written, they released a preface that says, it's 40 years since Humanist Manifesto 1933 appeared. Ever since then, events since then make that earlier statement seem far too optimistic. Nazism has shown the depths of brutality of which humanity is capable. Other totalitarian regimes have suppressed human rights. This is not word salad. This is not nonsense. This is saying we wrote the first manifesto, and since then we've seen Nazis and oppression and totalitarianism. And we note that there are many different kinds of humanism in the world. So then they wrote this. We, the undersigned, while not necessarily endorsing every detail of the above, so already we're noting that people can sign on to this manifesto without agreeing with every detail of it, pledge our general support to Humanist Manifesto 2 for the sake of humankind. These affirmations are not a final credo or dogma, but an expression of a living and growing faith. We invite others in all lands to join us in further development or developing and working for these goals. The statements in the Second Humanist Manifesto to take position statements on a number of different things. To think that you have countered the Humanist Manifesto because not everybody agrees on what makes them happy is a simplistic level of confusion about reality that I just don't know how to interact with.
Yeah, the notion that that's a gotcha for secular moral systems is, it demonstrates a lack of familiarity with the discourse, I would say.
We have a couple of atheist calls I'm going to go ahead and get to in just a second. So if you're on the line right now, we'll get to you. We're still looking for theist callers, and ideally, we'd love to get some theist callers that, I don't know, are genuine and honest. Somebody who wants to defend their beliefs and not just get on the air in order to babble whatever. If you have objections to secular humanism or the Humanist Manifesto, those things are viable calls too. I don't know to what extent Dara does or doesn't subscribe to Humanist Manifestos 1, 2, or 3, because he and I have never discussed it, or at least I don't recall us discussing it. And so you may get some different views on things. But you know what you won't get is us saying that a well thought out document that espouses ideals, that supports the notion of free inquiry, separation of church and state, individual freedoms, individual sovereignty, ethics based on intelligence, moral education, religious skepticism, reason, science, technology, and it touches on evolution and education, that this document, which was then signed onto by some of the most brilliant luminaries out there, you're not going to get us to acknowledge that this is nonsense. What we will acknowledge, and I've acknowledged many times before, is they are imperfect and incomplete. And yet those very documents recognize that from the outset by saying this isn't a dogma and this isn't a final version. See, what secular humanism is and why secular humanism is vastly superior to any religious ideology that I'm aware of is that secular humanism has as its goal to get better at making a better world. And that means it can change. When we improve and increase our understanding of what makes the world a better place, of, hey, we were wrong about this, or we oversimplified this, or we need to broaden things in this area, it allows for that change. And it's one of the reasons why when I posted a video a week ago, because Dr. Coyne is incredibly confused or dishonest when discussing gender issues. And so I created a video called Coyne Fused About Gender. It's been overwhelmingly positively received by people out there all over the place, and I appreciate that. But there have been a couple of comments. And one consistent comment is, this seems off topic. This seems like it's beyond the scope. This seems like mission creep. Why do I care what my atheist organizations think about gender? Well, you don't. And this isn't about what atheist organizations think about gender. This is about what your secular organizations think about human rights and dignity, and about science, and about open and honest education that doesn't marginalize and further marginalize a group of people based on sensationalist language. Things like saying, there's a cultural, I'm forgetting the word, cultural infection, something. They keep referring to it. Somebody in chat will get what it is. And it's, Arden did a study recently where they showed that there was like 1,000 kids. And they're like, oh, that's just so many. And I'm like, you know what? We have a cultural epidemic right now on our show because there's a couple thousand people watching us. So let's see what the atheists have to say today. Maybe we'll get atheists that represent something way better than a theist could. Social contagion. Thank you. Thank you to chat. By the way, congratulations on the 2,000 plus of you that are currently in the show. You're now a social contagion. Mark in Scotland's calling. Did you hear Dara was on and you decided to call so that you have some company from the UK? Welcome, Mark. Oh, Mark, if you're on your phone, I see you're on the web browser. You may have to tap your phone to wake it up and then tap the browser to wake up your microphone. Because as it stands right now, we can't hear you. Well, I'm going to put you back in the queue. And we will go to Etienne, him in Maryland. How you doing? You are live on the show with Dara and Matt.
Hey, how's it going, Dara and Matt?
Hello.
I'm doing all right.
Or should I say Mickey Mouse and Goofy?
That's true. Thank you so much for the generous donation the other day and something that may inspire us to do more fun, clippy things like that.
No problem.
So what's going on?
So I've been paying attention to those LA fires that's been going on recently. And I've noticed on social media and other places there's a lot of theists, both Christians and Muslims. There's a lot of Christians who say, "Oh, God is punishing California for those liberals and democrats and whatnot." And then on the other hand, you have many Muslims in the Middle East and elsewhere who are basically rejoicing that this is happening, because of the U.S.'s support for Israel and whatnot. And it's really kind of infuriating too, because especially with the people rejoicing because of the whole Israel support thing, because I'm generally quite supportive of Palestine, and what's going on in Gaza is pretty infuriating. But then there's all kinds of people who are looking at that and saying, "Oh well, they just deserve it. They're just infidels," and it hits home personally for me too, because I have relatives who live in LA. So yeah, I guess my question is just, how can we have better conversations with people like this who take up these pretty disturbing apocalyptic positions on these types of things, or if it's even possible?
Yeah, it's a tale as old as time, isn't it? Where some of the nastier theists out there will look at natural disasters and allege that this is God's judgment upon the sinful or something like that. I do think it's important to acknowledge that this comes from the nastier theists. I wouldn't care to put a number on it because I don't have statistical data, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that we're not talking about all theists here. I think there's many theists out there who are looking at those wildfires and their hearts go out to those people like mine does, and they may very well have donated their time, their money, and so on to the relief effort. So there are many good theists out there. I would imagine that the majority of them are good, decent, reasonable, honest people. But you're right, there are nasty theists out there who view their theology through this lens, and they think that natural disasters are some kind of a punishment that's been doled out by God. And it is despicable. It is utterly despicable. What frustrates me about it is the manner in which they are inconsistent in this regard. When a natural disaster then befalls people who they do not perceive as being worthy of punishment, there's always a different ad hoc justification. God is being mysterious, or God is testing our faith, don't you know? And that kind of reasoning is ad hoc. They're just making up claims as they go along. You could view it through the lens of a kind of a just so story, where no matter what the data is, it's trivially easy to invent a story which explains the data. You know, if my keys go missing, I can just allege that the key-stealing fairies took them. Maybe the key-stealing fairies were exacting their vengeance upon me for not praying or for not worshipping them with enough grace and enthusiasm or what have you. So this is the kind of thinking that's going on there. It's not very sophisticated, I'm afraid to say, and it has to be called out for the kind of irrationality that it is. In terms of how we actually have a reasonable conversation with these people, that's the golden question. Matt has dedicated a significant portion of his life to doing just that, so he's probably best placed to answer that question. So I think I should kick it over to you, Matt. How do we have conversations with these people who think that God is punishing Californians or whatnot, punishing the people of LA? What do you say to a mind that's been poisoned to that extent?
Well, I've recently changed my mind. So, for example, while I still have my Facebook account, I only post outgoing notifications to my Facebook account about shows that we're actually going to do. So, like I made a post today. Outside of that, I don't interact on Facebook. I am no longer commenting. I'm no longer interacting at all. I haven't really spent any significant time on Twitter interacting with anybody. And part of it's because I'm not convinced that I have any good reason to think that I'm interacting with honest interlocutors. I don't see, I'm less worried about how I should interact with some random person who I don't know, who may or may not be serious, who may be a bot, who may be spewing propaganda, who may be part of the dead internet on social media, when in fact I could engage with other people elsewhere. I think that social media is basically worse than the scum you might dig out from underneath your toes after walking barefoot through a swamp. And I don't care to spend, like, I post things, I post pictures on our Insta about various things. But yeah, I'm not that worried about how to have better conversations on social media, because every day and look at the calls that we've had today. This isn't social media. The first caller, clearly not serious, just wanted to spew forth, nonsense. And then the other caller, it's difficult to tell how serious that person is because they seem to be genuinely confused, but genuinely confused in a way that like makes me think somebody's off of their meds, genuinely confused. Like they're unable to, even when presented with a straightforward syllogism, identify that this structure, where true premises lead to true conclusions, when used on what they just said, demonstrate a problem with their thinking, even in the simplest sense. And they couldn't think outside of the abstract, or outside of the literal. So for the people who are like, they deserve it, this is God's punishment, I have zero interest in interacting with them on social media. If they want to call in and have a conversation to where I can maybe figure out if I'm talking to a genuine interlocutor, I'll do that. But outside of that, I don't engage in debates on social media. I don't even put up with it much in my Twitch channel.
Yeah, seems like it's probably better to ignore the stuff on social media.
Yeah, I mean, Dara, you're muted.
Forgive me, sorry. Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it, Etienne? Because at the end of the day, we do, I think, to some extent or another, need to change some minds. I think, I mean, all you need to do is imagine a scenario where the number of those nastier theists is growing and growing and growing, and perhaps we don't need to imagine, perhaps that's happening before our eyes. And there has to be some kind of pushback. Yeah, how do you do it? I don't know. I feel like social media, I think the reason Matt is saying what he's saying about social media, and I think the reason a lot of people are fed up with social media, is because social media has poisoned all discourses. Everything has become clickbait. Everybody has become balkanized because everybody gets their opinion fed back to them in a 24-hour loop because of the way algorithms work. If you click into one conspiratorial article, more of that is going to be fed to you because that's the way algorithms work, so that ad revenue can be generated. And so people have become balkanized and galvanized in their positions to such an extent that it's hard to see how you actually break through. Perhaps I'm revealing my naivety here, but the reason I do what I do on my channel, and the reason I consider it an honor to be sat here today with Matt, is because this gives me an opportunity to speak to people and to promote a message of reason and rationality and hopefully affect some change. Perhaps that's utterly naive. Perhaps that's even arrogant. Maybe I'm an idiot for thinking that I can change anybody's mind. But hope springs eternal. And if there is a faith that I have, while it isn't religious, I might have just named it. And that faith is the hope that people might actually change their minds and we can make the world a better place. If that makes me a hopeless, naive, arrogant romantic, then so be it. But I'm right there with you, Etienne. I think it's important to change these people's minds, but therein resides the mystery. I'm not exactly sure how we do it. I'm trying to do it in my own way. Whether or not it's working, the audience, the people who've seen my stuff, people watching right now would have to be the judge. But maybe Matt is right. Maybe I'm fighting a losing battle, and it's just, there's just no point. And if that's the case, it's a very sad day indeed.
There are times when you can tell. It's getting harder to tell. And certainly almost anybody could, I could join. We've seen this since the beginning. I remember when I first got on the internet back with America Online, you've got mail. And I would jump into chat rooms, and right from the get-go, it was very clear. There were some people who wanted to have a chat conversation. Some of them would be doing like movie quote trivia, in chat. I mean, it's just this was the early days of the internet, movie quote trivia, and then you'd join a chat room and find people, and then go private, and it'd end up with text, sex stuff, and whatever. But you'd also have people on there who were pretending to be something other than they were. And so you'd have these ASL or age, sex, language, or location, not language, or maybe language. Maybe if they did that too, who knows? But you'd have that thing there that human race just typed into chat to suss out. But you have no way of telling if anybody's lying. And so we have built an entire new civilization on the back of anonymous communications from people who, up until recently, you at least knew were people, even if you didn't know they were serious or honest or accurate. And now you don't even know if they're people. And ChatGPT and other large language models and stuff like that, I think the first caller was reading a ChatGPT printout of come up with a way to defend intelligent design. And so I am in a weird position in the, my private channel is getting ready to cross 200,000 subscribers. The line has 151,000 subscribers. I am to some extent some minor public figure. And what that means is that all day, every day, whether I'm on YouTube, Twitch, email, social media, somebody's trying to troll me. And when it reached a point where it seemed like that was happening 3 or 4 times more often than I was actually finding a good, honest conversation, That's when social media held no interest for me anymore. And so if there's someone I genuinely know, and that's the nice thing is I've been on Facebook long enough that even though I'm not planning to use it anymore, I at least know most of the people there that I've been interacting with for a couple decades are real. So.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, Matt. I think that might explain the difference between you and I on this topic. My channel is getting ready to cross 23,000 subscribers. So my channel is considerably smaller than yours and that of The Line. And so I haven't been exposed to near the level of vitriol and poison that you have. It may very well end up, assuming my channel continues to grow and so forth, I may very well end up agreeing with you in the long term. I might end up making a very similar decision to you. And so, yeah, I totally get where you're coming from there. And I'm sure Etienne does as well. It just, yeah, makes perfect sense.
I want to try and give you a quick answer before we move on, because we got some theist callers now and some others calling in. There may be a way to find questions to ask to find out if you're talking to someone who is at all interested in the truth. This is something I started doing years ago, and that is, do you care more whether your beliefs are true or whether or not they're appealing to you? And if they say they care about truth and you present a case for the truth and a case for the truth, and they're still finding a way to avoid that, at that point you can say, look, I thought we were saying we agreed that we cared about the truth. Not only have I presented to you why I'm convinced, but I've talked about the method of why I'm convinced. Let's set aside this discussion that we're having about Gaza or the LA riots or fires or anything like that, and say, can we come to some kind of agreement on the nature and quality of evidence that we would expect to become convinced of a similar claim? Because that can at least get you into a side discussion about what people find convincing without the baggage of, it's Gaza, it's genocide, it's LA, it's, sin, it's God, it's, move the discussion to the meta level, the behind the scenes level. See if you can get agreement there. Because if you can get agreement there, but not about the actual issue, then the only thing left is either they're not following the agreed upon path to truth, or you actually disagree on some premise. And so that can at least help guide the conversation. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that's pretty helpful. I always learn a lot from you and also Dara.
Well, awesome. If you find better ways to do it, by the way, let us all know.
That's very kind of you to say as well, Etienne. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And will do.
Thanks. See you later.
Bye-bye, Etienne.
All right. We got a theist caller. Keto is calling in from Virginia Beach. Or not Virginia Beach. Just Virginia. Pronouns are him. Has a good argument for intelligent design and creationism. Keto, you're on with Dara and me, maybe. Keto, I see you're calling from a web client. You'll need to tap your phone to wake your phone up, and then tap the browser to wake the browser up. And if you can't do that, then I'm afraid I'm going to have to drop you, and that's incredibly disappointing. But you're calling in through the web client.
Just return them to the queue.
Yep. We'll see if we can get a call screener to talk to you. All right. Oh, Mark's calling back from Scotland. Mark,
hi, can you hear me
there?
Yeah, can you hear me this time? Oh, great.
Yep.
Yeah, my mic's disconnected itself from my PC for some reason. I don't know what happened. So I think I'm pretty good. I'm an atheist, as you've probably gathered. I think I'm pretty good at sort of speaking up for myself and defending my atheist stance and explaining why I'm an atheist. But there is one thing that I have a problem with, and this is, I don't know if you call this a presuppositional position or if I'm misusing that term, but
almost everyone. By the way, my apologies, Mark. I need to make this statement. Just so everybody knows, if you hear anyone, me, another host or co-host on some line thing, say, well, that's just presup, or that sounds a lot like the Kalam cosmology argument, take it with a grain of salt, because argument categorization is difficult and complicated. And depending on how you construct your argument, you could be making a cosmological argument. You could be making a first cause argument. You could be making the Kalam cosmological argument in particular, because cosmological argument is the category. And similarly, presup arguments is where you presuppose God as the underground or the foundation for morality or logic, generally speaking. It could be for something else, but it's where you're presupposing a God. Outside of that, it's not a presup argument. And I see I'm about to do a series of videos on this because I see a gazillion atheists going, oh, that's just presup gobbledygook, just like the Kalam, as if those are even in the same fucking category. So, Mark, my apologies for interrupting you. Please continue. If you get it wrong, no big deal.
That's all right. I thought I might be using the wrong term incorrectly, and I was perhaps correct there. No, this is more what I'm talking about is where Christians will claim you do believe in God. Everyone believes in God. Everyone knows God exists, but as an atheist, you're lying or you're deluding yourself or whatever. And there's some Bible verse they always quote to back this up. I can't remember exactly which one, but I'm certain that you guys will be familiar with it. You know, something about by his works you know him and you are without excuse and that kind of wording.
It's from Romans. It's because the invisible things of his nature, they are without excuse. But without excuse doesn't mean that you actually know. It just means that you should know. So even their reference of that verse for this subject is wrong.
Well, I find it incredibly frustrating because I know in your case, Matt, because I've watched your shows on and off for a while, I know that that you were kind of raised in a Christian household, a God-believing household. So when a Christian says, you know, that you already know God exists, everyone knows exists, that might seem a little more plausible from someone in your position who would have heard about God on a regular basis for the youngest age. I have a completely different scenario. I was brought up in a secular household. My father was an atheist, my mother an agnostic, and they had a kind of an agreement that they wouldn't really, you know, kind of push me in any direction religion-wise until I started to question it and ask questions myself. So I know for a fact I literally had not only did not know God existed, I literally had no concept of God until until in my childhood I asked a question about death, what happens when you die, and then my mother explained to me that, well, some people think this happens, etc. That was the first point in my life that I even had a concept for God. So when Christians tell me, you know God exists, I know from personal experience that is bullshit. I know for a fact I had no concept of a God until it was introduced to me by externally by my mother, as I say.
My favorite response, Mark, is to just say, I've just done it here. This is my book. It's a one-page book, MagicSkeptic's book. And it says, everyone knows that God doesn't exist. So it says in my book that everyone knows that God doesn't exist. So all of the Christians who say that God does exist are just suppressing the truth, because everyone actually knows that God doesn't exist. And I can verify that with reference to my book. That will very quickly turn into a debate about why I am an authority versus God. And then you can actually have a conversation. Why should I take your God's word seriously? Why should I take the Bible seriously? And then things begin to reveal themselves very quickly from there, in my experience. This is why these arguments are just assertive garbage, right? We can all play this game. And if anybody wanted to say, oh, but that's a silly argument, Dara, because we know you're not a god, well, I can just as easily quote another religion, and then they'll just have another baseless assertion there. That's a false god. Well, how do we distinguish between a real god and a false god? And then we get into another conversation there. This is just garbage. It's steaming hot garbage. And yeah, this might sound like a strange statement for me to say. I would be very curious to get Matt's take on this as well, by the way. I would so much rather a theist give me the kalam, or they tried a contingency argument, or they give me a design argument, Paley's watchmaker. I will say something about those arguments. Those arguments, let's use Paley as an example. Paley's watchmaker is a legitimate attempt at trying to demonstrate the existence of God. It fails.
Yeah.
It fails, but it's a legitimate attempt. It's an analogical argument, but it's also an inductive argument. It looks at objects in the world and tries to use inductive reasoning and evidence. It's arguably a naturalistic approach insofar as it appeals to complex objects in the world. Paley himself referred to things like eyes and complex biology and so on. And so I have more respect for that kind of an approach, and I would rather speak to a theist who tables an argument like that 20 times over speaking to the kind of theist you're referring to, who just asserts that I already agree with them. Get out of here with that nonsense. Are you kidding me? It's just utter garbage. But there you go. That's just my 2 cents, Mark. Make of that what you will. But yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. I don't know. I very much appreciate your thoughts on that. I think it's something that became, although I wasn't raised religious, it became very important to me to be able to speak about religions, because I had a friend who was afraid of going to hell, or had a fear of going to hell, to the extent that it was psychologically crippling for her. And that was when I got interested in really kind of trying to kind of turn her around to the idea that she wasn't going to hell, because hell doesn't exist, because God doesn't exist. But so I guess that's the point at which it became important to me to be able to kind of stand up for a secular viewpoint, if that makes sense.
You hit the nail on the head, Mark. This is something that I am responding to on my channel all of the time. There is this assumption that I encounter anecdotally, and as I said on my channel, and you sound like you might have encountered it as well, where people just assume that atheism is hopeless, or that there's no joy in it, or something like that. Now, strictly speaking, atheism is devoid of content, of course, fine. But that doesn't mean that there aren't psychological benefits to becoming an atheist. And one of those benefits is undoubtedly the potential for escaping things like fear of hell. Fear of hell is an incredibly pernicious thing. So much so that the Recovering from Religion Foundation dedicates significant resources to this sort of thing, fear of hell syndrome and so on. People need very real counseling and help in order to get over these things. And so when people assume that religion is quote unquote comforting and atheism is quote unquote hopeless or dark or nihilistic, in fact, that's possibly the case. Some people can struggle with nihilism and they become atheists. I grant you that easily. But the alternative is also quite possible. It's possible that when somebody leaves their faith, that their level of contentment improves, because after losing that belief in hell, they, not always, but will sometimes lose the accompanying fear that goes along with it. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And so kudos to you, Mark, for undertaking that mission to try and, convince your friend that she's actually going to be okay and that fear of hell isn't something that she needs to worry about. But it would be remiss of me not to say that, and I don't know how long ago this was, if it was recent, maybe you should refer that friend to Recovering from Religion and so on, because I mean, I'm not a mental health professional, and you haven't mentioned that you are, Mark, and somebody in that position might need professional help. And that is testament to the damage that religion can inflict upon people. And so these people who assume that religion is comforting, and that's the end of the conversation, they haven't thought about this problem deeply enough. And people like your friend demonstrate that the contrary can be the case. Religion can be incredibly destabilizing.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I've lost touch with the friend I'm referring to for reasons that are complicated and would quite possibly be a breach of her trust to talk about.
Sure. I'm not inviting you to divulge any private details, Mark.
Yeah.
I would never do that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So,
well, I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, on this, I mean, I don't disagree with anything that Dara said about this when it comes to, that there's a God. I've heard this not only my entire life as a theist, but also as an atheist. It's incredibly common. It is. I like Dara's kind of response to it because, your book says that I know. Actually, their book doesn't say that I know. In fact, I would argue that, for example, in Romans 1:20, where it says the invisible things of his nature, blah, 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 such that they are without excuse. That doesn't mean that someone knows isn't aware. It just means that they should know, just like it's out there for anybody who'll look or anybody who'll find it. And if everybody already knew that God existed and knew that the real God, then why would there be multiple instructions to go ye therefore unto all the world preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ? Why is it the case that the Bible recognizes there are people who believe other religions and people, the fool hath said in his heart there is no God? And even if we just take that as kind of a at face value assessment, the Bible is acknowledging there are people out there who, in the language, the fool hath said in his heart there is no God, doesn't mean you have done an intellectual survey and evaluated the claims for theism and found the claims wanting. It means that at the deepest level in your heart, you are at least not convinced that a God exists, and in some cases convinced that gods don't exist. Whatever Psalms, that passage in Psalms, 14:11, 14:1, whatever that passage in Psalm means, there's no version of it that supports the notion that everybody knows and believes in God to begin with. That simply isn't true by their own verses.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and it is 14:1. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Not only that, but that particular verse goes further than most theists ever want to acknowledge. Because Psalm 14:1 doesn't just say, the fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. It says, they are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. Which means they're saying there are people out there who either do not believe that a God exists or believe that no God exists. So that means there are people out there who are not convinced that a God exists. And the Bible further goes to say that they're corrupt and they doeth no good thing, which is an absolute lie in the sense that even if all of us godless heathens were generally terrible people, we have still clearly done good things. Maybe you've never donated to charity, but I have. Maybe you've never held a door open for someone. Maybe you've never looked after somebody's house while they're gone for free. Maybe you've never taken their pet for a walk. Maybe you've never lied to them and told them that their child is pretty and can grow up to be whatever it wants. Maybe that's not a good thing, but even with their own book, they are wrong in claiming that everybody knows. And the notion that everybody knows is in direct opposition to, for Christians at least, their instruction that they're ignoring, which is to be ready at all times to give a reason for the faith that's within them and to go out and preach the gospel to the world. The gospel is not, you already know there's a God. You'll find out for sure when you're dead. Hang on. I thought I knew already there was a God. Why would I need to be dead to find out for sure if I already know? It is the laziest of, it's not even apologetics. It is just a bald-faced assertion. I would rather have someone tell me, look at the trees, which is another version of that Romans thing, because it went for the invisible things of his nature are there such that they have no excuse. That's talking about creation. That creation screams to anyone, who's listening, that there's a God. So their own book counters their claim. And I just for reference, I went ahead and pulled up 120 so that I could read it instead of just paraphrasing it. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. But
even if they were correct, you got to begin two verses. You got to begin 2 verses earlier, which is, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath shown it to them, for the invisible things. So basically, all of this is those godless, unrighteous heathens out there. God's tried to show them that he exists by the beauty and structure of nature. And they don't have an excuse, because when they knew God, they glorified him not as God. See, here's the thing. Romans 1:21 continues, because when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. What that's talking about is, when I look at the world, when Matt looks at the world, and I see beauty in reptiles, I'm supposed to see creation, and those beautiful reptiles are an evidence for God. But because I'm ungodly and unrighteous, when I look at the reptiles, I don't credit God with creation. I credit science, not science, the process. I credit science for creating. I credit science for the process that led to the understanding that what we see in these beautiful reptiles is the result of minute changes in allele frequency over a period of time. That these are the phenotypical things that we see, that we recognize, that are appealing to us, and therefore we call them beautiful. And we recognize that there's a process that is natural that led to that.
Yeah. That all makes a great deal of sense. I mean, just thanks for talking to me, guys. It's given me food for thought. Just one last question I think I have for you is that when I was much younger, like 25 years ago, I'm in my 50s. When I was much younger, I kind of read much of the Bible just out of curiosity. I've since, forgotten much of it, but I recently started rereading it again just because I want to understand these things better, to be able to counter things better. It is a bit of a slog, to be honest, but is there any particular version of the Bible that you would recommend over any other?
This is right up Matt's street. Matt, you gotta be the person who recommends this.
I like the Lego Bible.
The Lego
Um, the Brick Testament. It's a website that goes through and creates the
right.
Bible stories. I also like R. Crumb's version of the Bible. Now, when it comes to actually studying it, don't go out and get a special Bible or special version of the Bible. You can go to e-sword.net, e-sword.net. There's a utility there that is put together. And so right now, literally on my screen, I've showed it before. I'm not going to mess with our production team by showing it now. But, well, I don't know. Actually, let me see if I can do that. Do I have a full screen setup? No, that's for the other monitor. Okay. So this utility, I've got it open right now. And so on one screen, I have 1, 2, 3. Well, I'm not even going to bother counting them. It's like 50 different versions of the Bible, some of which include concordances and dictionaries. So that when you look at Romans 1:20, for example, I can see that the thing that is translated in English as invisible things is the actual Greek word aeratos. And you can then look that up and see that it appears in the King James 5 times and how it's used in different ones. You can then, in addition to the dictionaries and words, there are also Bible commentaries. I've got probably 30 or 40 of them that are written from a number of different great Christian and Jewish theologians and scholars. And you can search this and cross-reference. So you don't need to go get a Bible. You can just download that, and then you'll have access to tons of different options.
Thank you. I had started off with a New King James Version study Bible, which maybe isn't the best. I don't know, but yeah, I'll definitely check that out. Great.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for calling. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Mark.
No problem. I have a million things I'd like to ask you about, so I will probably call. Thanks very much.
Yep, call back another time, and we'll if you call back a million times, that might be a bit much, but you know what? I don't think I've taken a million calls in the last 20 years, so why not? Shoot for 1 million. Call me 1 million times.
I was just going to add at the end there, before we change topic, that even if you were to grant theists that the Bible does say that everybody knows that God exists, you can still hold their feet to the fire even on the assumption of that assertion, because that would entail that babies know. I seem to recall that you actually put this to Saiten Burenkate on stage, Matt, when you debated him, right? If I recall correctly, you said, so babies know that God exists, even though babies, there's no real good evidence to suggest that babies could possibly have a concept of God. And he just bit the bullet and said yes. So look, there's no depth beyond which these kinds of theists are not going to stoop, but you can still reveal that kind of lunacy, if you will, by holding their feet to the fire and such things, right? So clearly babies don't believe in God, but of course that view would entail that they do, and that's ludicrous. So
I tell you, this next one, let me just, without getting into the details and defining things, Dara, do you think we have free will?
I do not.
Okay. Under most definitions of free will, I probably don't either. And so Michael's from Virginia. Michael's a naturalistic pantheist who wants to prove there's no free will. Michael, I'm not sure that we care, or why you would try to convince two people who probably don't think there's free will that there's not, or that there's not.
I was thinking more of your audience, but I'm glad to agree.
No, that's not how this works.
Okay. Well, what do you want to talk about?
I don't know. I'd like, maybe you could defend naturalistic pantheism, because I'm not even sure what you mean by that.
Sure.
But you felt it was important enough to make it your identity. So if we don't disagree on free will, maybe we disagree on naturalistic pantheism.
Yeah, I did leave it. I had a suspicion that this might happen, so I wanted that as a secondary topic.
So
let
how
me
are you
get into it
defining
then.
how are you defining pantheism?
That God is equivalent to the universe.
Okay. But do you think that the universe is a conscious agent acting? Or, well, that's what agent means. So do you think the universe is a conscious
Yeah,
agent? You
I'm not
do?
100% sure, but I think that the evidence points in that direction. Yeah.
You think the evidence points to the fact that the universe is conscious?
Yeah. Yeah. It's based off
Cool.
of
What's the
what we
evidence
know
for
about.
that? What's the evidence for that?
So if we think about how consciousness arises, we already know that consciousness has to first arise from non-conscious material, like the firings of our neurons. So that shows that consciousness can arise from non-conscious material, and then we have to establish
You
why
just said two
consciousness
things
arises.
that you just said two things that aren't the same. One is that it can arise, and the other is that it must arise.
Oh, I didn't mean to say must. You caught me there. You just can.
Okay. So you're saying consciousness can arise from non-conscious material.
Yes.
Okay. So is my left hand conscious?
I don't think so. No.
Am I conscious?
Yes.
Is my chair conscious? Is my room conscious?
I don't think so. No, not based off of my theory so far.
Okay. So it's not merely that it can arise from consciousness. There's something else. So if I'm conscious and my room is not, and probably my house isn't, and probably my planet isn't, then why would you say the universe is?
Because the universe contains within a system a flow of information that changes the system itself, which is what I think consciousness is.
The
Define
universe contains a flow of information. Why isn't that true for my house?
Oh, the information that flows is not within the system. It's between things within a larger system. So if wind blows against your house and shakes the house, the system is actually the wind plus the house at that point. So it's not change within a system. It's unless you count the universe as the system.
My house contains me. My house contains me, and I'm conscious.
Oh.
And so that the house does not. You said the universe contains, so you're not looking at the universe as the container. And so somehow well, continue, I guess. I'm confused.
No. You're helping me out. That makes sense so far. I think what you said. You're right. Like just because the house contains you doesn't mean that the house is conscious. I follow.
Okay. So what evidence do we have that the unit? Because first of all, I don't have any ability to explore the entirety of the universe or to explore the universe in its entirety as a single entity. I not only do not understand the scope of it, I don't like do you think there's any way that a galaxy on this side of the universe is currently communicating with a galaxy on the other side of the universe?
No, I think it has communicated in the past. No, not that it's currently communicating.
At what point did those two galaxies communicate?
Probably the moment before the Big Bang, or what happened.
Those galaxies, no, sir. Those galaxies did not exist. Galaxies formed over time. Galaxies did not exist.
The energy that made them.
Okay, so you're not talking about these two galaxies communicating. You're talking about the energy that eventually made these galaxies. That's not the same thing, and therefore it's an equivocation fallacy.
Right, but if the particles that made those galaxies...
You can't say, no, Michael, you can't say right, but. It's either right or it's not. So I'm made up, hang on. Is a chicken conscious?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. If I eat the chicken and I'm unconscious, Well, let's say if I eat the material of the chicken, does that make me conscious?
No.
When I flush the material down the toilet, does that make the toilet or the water or whatever that material ends up, does that make that conscious?
No, it doesn't. I don't think I'm doing a composition fallacy or something.
You are if you're saying if you're trying to argue that this galaxy and a galaxy on the other side of the universe used to communicate because before they were galaxies, they were energy that was potentially closer together. You are compounding confusion because there's no way for you to demonstrate that shortly after the Planck time, there were two collections of energy that were in fact communicating that then later became these two galaxies. But even if you could show that, that wouldn't show that those galaxies communicated just because constituent pieces of those galaxies communicated. You can't demonstrate either that they do communicate, that they used to communicate, or that even before they were galaxies, they communicated.
I think that one day we'll be able to show that what happened before the Big Bang.
Then call me back on that day, Michael, because now you're just fucking wasting my fucking time.
All right, bye.
Goodbye. I'm a naturalistic pantheist because I think the universe is conscious. Ooh, well, does it make sense under this model? No. What about this? No. How about this? No. Well, I think someday we'll be able to find, then call me back then, because until you have a way to demonstrate this, your position of pantheism is unwarranted. I don't want people to call in to defend their suspicions. I suspect that the universe is conscious because something's conscious. Yeah, somebody in chat said that's as bad as you'll find out when you're dead. That is exactly right.
Yeah, that was bewildering. I have to admit, that was like, what did communication even, what did the term communication even mean in that context? How do energies communicate with one another? I understand how energy can interact, perhaps, but how does energy communicate with other energy? Are we just equivocating there? What evidence is there that galaxies communicate or energies communicate? I was just kind of in stunned silence there. I mean, I just don't know. That was just utterly bewildering.
A better way to defend that is to talk about spooky action at a distance and how we are learning more about time and maybe negative time, and we are looking at electrons and quarks maybe interacting. Maybe this universe is communicating with that universe. That at least there, you're talking about some potential science. But if your answer is, I think someday we'll figure this out, then you are believing something prior to having sufficient reason.
Yep.
And here's the bad part. You're acknowledging that you're believing it prior to having sufficient reason, which means you are knowingly, willingly, irrationally holding a position because you're convinced eventually someday some version of that position will be demonstrated and confirmed, and then you'll be right. Well, congratulations. You're right up there with alchemists and, all these individuals. And the time to believe it is when it's been demonstrated to be true. The time to believe it's when there's sufficient evidence. We have only one caller remaining. And unless that changes, it looks like Gabe's going to be the call that ends up wrapping up today's show. Although, if you've got questions, we'll take atheist questions. But if it's a shorter show, that's fine as well, because we have. Let me, Gabe, I want to put you on mute, and then we'll get to you in a second, because I have announcements to make and other stuff. Not the least of which is Morgan. I hear we have news and announcement, and somebody has won the contest over on our Patreon, patreon.com/calltheline. You do not have to be a paid member to participate in this. You could have been a free member, but it sorted it out. And there was a graphic we put up that had a bunch of blanks on it that we were going to fill in. And here it is, now completely filled. The Line has a podcast starting January 20th. You can find more, well, I guess, Amargan, where can they find more information?
This is it right now.
This is it right now. This is it. We're not going to tell you anymore. Jimmy's got some stuff. Let me message him real quick. There we go. So yeah, the Line's got a podcast coming up. I don't know all the details. We should probably get Jimmy on at some point to talk about it. But here, calling in from Texas, pronouns are he, him, is Gabe. How are you, Gabe? You're on with Dara and Matt.
Hello, Matt. Hello, Dara. How are you doing?
Hello.
I wanted to know, how do you respond to one of your haters that I'm debating saying, ha 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 ha, you have no objective moral standards to say that the passages in the Bible pertaining to slavery, misogyny, and homophobia are wrong. Therefore, my worldview is correct. And that's, it's just a matter of opinion that for me, slavery, misogyny, and homophobia are wrong.
There's no problem with secular moral systems that is solved in any way by appealing to a God. If in fact we don't have any objective moral foundation, and I think that that's probably correct, I'm not arguing for objective moral foundations. I'm arguing for objective moral assessments that once you begin with a foundation, a goal, you can then make non-subjective assessments about whether or not an action is consistent with that goal. But if somebody's like, ooh, you don't have an objective foundation, then the answer is, neither do you, as far as I can tell. Telling me that you think this is what God wants, first of all, you have no way of demonstrating that. So just the fact that it's not just your opinion, it's no more objective than if you said, this is what my mom taught me. This is what the king wants. This is what, the government says. Those are not objective foundations either. So I would want to know how they solve this problem. And in every case that I've engaged with over the years, debating people on morality, nobody, including the best moral thinkers that theism has to offer, has come up with anything other than because this is consistent with the character of God. And yet that gets around divine command theory. Let me back up a second, because I want to make sure I explain it in a way everybody understands. When theists argue for an objective moral foundation, they tend to be doing one of two different things. They're either saying God says these things, and that's what determines morality. That's divine command theory. And that allows God to say slavery is okay, and it is. Or slavery is wrong, and it is. The problem with divine command theory is that God could say slavery is okay and then change his mind later and say slavery is not okay, which is apparently what they'd like to think that he did, although at no point in the Bible does it say that slavery is not okay. Outside of divine command theory, you have another potential model, which is that morality is whatever is consistent with the character of God, and the character of God is unchanging. So all it is an assertion that somewhere out there is a perfect moral foundation, and that's what they're using as a foundation for their morals. The problem is, even if that were true, it would give you a non-subjective foundation. Wow, hiccup things. But even with that non-subjective foundation, which you might call objective, you have no way of demonstrating that you know what it is. If there's a God out there that serves as an objective foundation for morality, how do you show what it is, where it is, what its foundation is? And what if I fundamentally disagree with that being about what's moral? If God thinks it's moral to own people's property, he and I are in conflict. If God thinks it's better for a society to keep women in second-tier status, God and I are fundamentally in disagreement on morality. And so even if you have an objective foundation, that doesn't give me a reason to accept it, because an objective foundation could be wrong.
Yeah, this is part of an overall approach that I see apologists using, where they will present an intractable problem, or at least currently intractable problem, and then say, therefore, God. So they'll say to an atheist, you can't explain where consciousness comes from, therefore, God. You can't solve the problem of induction, therefore, God. You can't solve the problem of hard solipsism, therefore, God. And in this case, you can't establish the existence of moral facts, therefore, God. Please notice, Gabe, that in each and every one of these cases, there is an assumption that God solves these problems without demonstration. Essentially, what they want to do to the uninitiated, to white belt atheists who don't know their philosophy yet, they want to hold their feet to the fire, tangle them up in kind of mental contortions, attempting to solve intractable problems, all the while laughing and chuckling as you attempt to solve these, at least currently, intractable problems. Again, all the while assuming that they have the answer. But as Matt alluded to, on the moral front, the theistic solutions to this moral question are abysmal. Divine command theory is absolutely appalling. The Euthyphro dilemma solved this a long time ago. I won't bore the listeners by re-articulating it now. But the point is, this assumption that God solves all of these problems is just that, an assumption. So when they, as you say, laugh, ha 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 ha, how dare you judge the Bible when you can't establish moral oughts or categorical imperatives or objective morality or whatever you want to call it, all that you're dealing with there is an assumption. And just one last thing on that. When I critique the moral statements in the Bible, things like slavery and the treatment of women and homosexuals and so on, I can critique that as, and I'm a moral anti-realist, just so the listeners are aware, I can critique that as a moral anti-realist. And to suggest otherwise is to engage in an error that philosopher Lance Bush calls normative entanglement. The truth is, we all have access to the ethics. We can all say what we should and shouldn't do. I can give moral recommendations and tell people what they ought and ought not do, despite being a moral anti-realist. Everybody has access to the ethics. To respond to my moral recommendations by saying, oh, well, you can't ground it, is to engage in this mistake that Lance Bush calls normative entanglement. You are confusing, you are mixing up the ethics with the meta-ethics. And that's a serious error. And the final thing is this. You can also just do this as an internal critique. If your God is loving and kind and decent and is the standard of goodness and so on, then why is it that he commands people to own other human beings as property? Why is it that the Bible says that homosexuals should be stoned to death and so on? Nothing about that requires that I be a moral realist. I can launch that critique as an internal one that the theist would have to respond to. They would have to resolve that tension in their worldview. So again, this is just apologetics trickery, if you will. It's just a rhetorical strategy, and to the uninitiated, it might be successful, but it's not going to work against people like Matt or I.
Okay. So one day tell me, well, this is just a matter of opinion. What could I say exactly? Like,
you have to ask
maybe I don't
them,
understand that.
what is your objective foundation and how do you know it's right?
No, that's right.
So, in other words, rather than allowing them to flip the script, Gabe, rather than you going through a series of questions trying to justify some kind of moral realism, flip the script and say, hang on a minute, you're just assuming that you have an objective foundation for your morality. On what are you basing that assumption? How is it that your ethics are objectively grounded? And then right off the bat, you're going to go into the Euthyphro dilemma. They will say something like, God is the grounding for goodness, but then is what God commands good because God commanded it, in which case it's arbitrary, or is it good for some independent reason, in which case God is not the ultimate ground of goodness? So there's lots of different ways this can go. It's difficult for us to write the script for you in the abstract, Gabe. What I would recommend personally is to do some reading on meta-ethics and divine command theory and the Euthyphro dilemma and so on. And then you'll be armed with all of the tools you need in order to navigate such a dialectic.
The other thing is make sure you ask lots of questions and don't pretend to know anything you don't know, and be like, hey, I'd like to think about this and get back to you. Or I'd like to, talk to some people, because most people have no good concept about ethics and morals from a philosophical standpoint. Let's just be honest, and this is not an insult to anybody. Generally speaking, you are enculturated into societal norms and ethics. You are taught by your parents what's right and wrong. Some of them might say that it's because of God. Some of them might say that it's because of we're seeking well-being and using science. It doesn't matter. Most of what you think about right and wrong is inherited, and then it is altered by your personal experience and your interactions with others. So if your parents teach you that, you should, not support LGBTQ people, and then it turns out you're gay, or you meet somebody who's gay, or you get outside of the little pocket where it's safe to have bigoted views because they're never going to be challenged, and you get to where you learn, oh, maybe there's a better way. That still has absolutely nothing to do with what is the grounding for morality. The only thing that changed there was your perception, and one of the key aspects of every moral and ethical system that is not addressed in divine command theory or in the character of God thing, and that is, well, it's twofold. Empathy and consent. Everything about my secular moral system and about well-being can be looked at in terms of empathy and consent. And by granting individuals individual autonomy, you need consent. I posted a video about the dumbest argument against atheism ever, because somebody was like, atheism doesn't have a way to shut down bestiality. This is relevant to your call because this is, one of the common moral arguments. And I was pointing out, or moral objections by some people, I was pointing out that it's just absolutely silly, because my ethics are tied to consent, and I don't have a way to get consent from whatever animal is in their fictional bestiality scenario. The same is true, and I called this out when Michael Jones debated Daniel Hikachu at one of the debate con things. They had this big, long discussion about whether or not it was morally permissible to have sex with a 4-year-old going through precocious puberty, because Daniel is a Muslim who thinks Allah allows it. If they're going through puberty, that is from Allah, and therefore they can be married and all this other stuff. And Michael correctly pointed out how absolutely vile and gross this was. And Daniel, who's oblivious to anything other than a blind, I must do what I think God said to do, is sitting there defending sex and marriage with toddlers. And at no point in their entire discussion was the word or concept of consent considered. And that's because you had a Muslim and a Christian debating ethics. And they both make the same assumptions about ethics. And so they are both beginning with flawed foundations, such that they can have these, well, you're awful, well, you're awful. And all I have to do is say, you cannot get consent from a 4-year-old. There's a lot more to it than that, but that is a foundational premise. Anyway, that's about all I got for you, Gabe. Hope it's helpful.
Okay. Could I ask, because he also says, how can you trust your senses if science depends on trusting your senses? Therefore, God exists.
I anticipated this earlier, Gabe. If you recall what I said, this is, Apologist presents difficult or
Okay.
potentially even intractable problem, and then says, therefore, God. Right?
Okay,
So,
yes, I know that.
yeah, so this is essentially like some variation of solipsism, or
Wait,
how can I
Gabe,
know? Go for it, Matt.
Gabe, are you writing this down with the intent of taking what we say to somebody else?
Yes.
Okay, we're not going to slow down so you can take notes. You can just rewind the show and
Okay.
jot it down. But also, I would highly recommend you don't. I would highly recommend you don't take notes and then try to go use those notes to argue. Because no offense, you are not ready to argue this. These should be notes for you to look up stuff after this to get into it in more detail. If I fucking hate arguing by proxy. And if you're one of those people who are using me to have a proxy argument with your parents, when instead of actually learning this shit, that would annoy the fuck out of me. So I wanted to make sure I at least warned you not to do that. My apologies, Dara. Continue.
That's okay. Yeah, so Gabe, just to bring a potentially longer point to a close, just remember they're going to present either difficult to solve or indeed intractable problems, and then they're going to ask you to solve them. And that is not a genuine way to have a conversation. They're just assuming that they have the answer to this. God solves it. But then when you ask them to demonstrate how God solves these problems, what you'll find is that God doesn't solve it either. Matt addressed this earlier when he spoke about morality, but the same is true of all of these other problems as well. The truth is, if I can't trust my senses, I'm using those exact same senses to either detect God or to look at design in the world and use that design to infer that there's a designer and all the rest of it. The senses are involved there as well. And let's forget that if there is a God, God has the power to deceive us as well. So there's an assumption required from the theist, which is something like God instilled us with reliable senses, which is an assumption they have to make. Why couldn't God just be an evil God who wants to deceive us? Why couldn't God be something like Descartes' evil demon or something like this, right? So you can't get out of this by asserting God. It just doesn't work that way. Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
No, you're fine. You paused and with the delay, I thought it was done. This is the same point I was going to make in a slightly different way is this. We all are stuck relying on our senses. And the difference between me and a theist, or me and some theists, I won't say atheist, because there might be a theist out there that understands it, is that I recognize that my senses are unreliable, and we have ways to test how reliable our senses are. And we have no solution to the problem of hard solipsism, so I can't even confirm that the reality I'm experiencing is in fact the true capital R reality. But I will say that my model is already more reliable than any theist model out there, because my model recognizes not just the potential problems of trusting my senses, but relies on other individuals to help verify those things, and the uniformity and regularity of the universe that we presume but cannot demonstrate, and we presume that it is unable to be violated, but we cannot demonstrate that, is essential, because I get to go through life not having to think about, as I'm driving down the road, what if God makes a brick wall appear in front of my truck as I'm driving? That's not something that is within the realm of epistemic possibility, given my model. And so I don't have to worry about it or consider it at all. But if they believe in a God, that God absolutely could make a brick wall appear in the road directly in front of my truck. And they are the ones pretending that they have a more reliable sense data or a more reliable foundation for that sense data, when in reality, I have everything in the universe and currently nothing more. And they have everything in the universe and something huge that can completely create the universe, flip the universe on its head, change the rules of that universe, change how everything works. They don't fucking get to pretend that I'm the one on unstable ground. they have built their house on sand because they've built it on this notion that there's a magic being that can do almost anything, and that they arrogantly have detected him even when he wants to be undetectable. Anyway, we got to move on from there.
Could I ask for
Thanks,
what
Gabe.
literature could you recommend?
No, Gabe,
Literature.
I'm not making a book reading list. I've done entire videos on my channel
Okay.
about that. Go to my YouTube channel. There's a video there called What You Should Read.
Okay.
Thanks. I am reluctant. I like answering the questions, but I'm not here to be quizzed on a bunch of subjects and have a list of books or stuff. SkepticsannotatedBible.com, Wikipedia, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Yep, that's what I was going to recommend.
Yeah, that's where I tend to go for most stuff. All right, we're going to try this again. Supposedly, this is with, I guess, a second or third attempt. But now Keto's been calling in from a web interface, and now they're calling to say the Genesis creation account is true. Keto, are you there?
Absolutely, Mac. I'm right here, man. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what was happening the other times.
Yeah, I think my phone was just asleep or something. All right, anyways, let's get right down to the brass tacks, honestly. Not here to waste anyone's time. So, I basically believe that the Bible is the truth, nothing but the truth, and the whole truth. Specifically, people a lot of religious people, Christians of all the sorts, they like to say that Genesis, it's up to interpretation. Like me personally, if God had it written down in the Bible, I actually do believe that it is nothing but the truth, right?
Okay. So here's the problem. Here's a couple of problems. I don't know how you know that God had something written down in the Bible, but Genesis 1:1, or not just 1:1, not just the entire chapter of Genesis, gets the order of events in creation wrong as we understand it from science. So
how do you know that?
If the order of events in creation in Genesis don't match the order that happened according to science, how do we tell which one's right?
Sorry, say that again.
So Genesis has an order of events, and science has an order of events, and those two lists do not agree. How do we tell which one is right?
Well, you see, Matt, when you think about it, science was made by God. That's
okay. You are not serious. No, you are not serious. You cannot fool me. Are you just waiting to say something offensive?
No.
Did you call several times? Then answer the question that I asked you.
Okay.
Science has an order of events, and Genesis has an order of events, and they do not match up. So how do we tell which one is correct?
If you really want me to be intellectually honest here, I'd have to say that through evidence, through truth, you will always find the truth. And I mean, if you're ever searching for the truth, you will find it. You will find it.
That's not true. That's not true.
That's not true.
You can search for things forever and never find them. You can search for a solution to Fermat's last theorem, but that doesn't mean you're going to find it. You're engaged in sophistry now, and you are still avoiding the question. Is it so you can type the question into ChatGPT and have ChatGPT come up with some sort of response? Stop interrupting me and answer the fucking question. If Genesis has an order of events and science has an order of fucking events, how do you tell which one of them's fucking correct?
Well, I mean, to be honest here, I feel like any answer I give you is not going to be sufficient. I don't really have an answer.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's not honest.
I don't know.
That's not honest. That's not honest. That's cowardly bullshit. I've been here for 20 years. I'm going to mute you because I know you're getting ready to try and interrupt again. I've been here for 20 years having conversations with people, and at no point has someone given me their honest answer, and I've said, oh, no. I haven't accepted it. But there's a difference between you saying, I don't want to give you the answer because you won't accept it. Then why the fuck did you call? Why did you waste all of our time if you don't have an answer that we're willing to accept? And reminder here, all I have asked you repeatedly is, if there's a list of an order of events in Genesis and an order of events by science, what method do we use to tell which one of them is correct? Last fucking chance, Keto.
Yeah, it's just where the evidence leads us. Where the evidence leads us, we can.
Okay. Does the evidence more strongly suggest that Earth existed prior to light?
Honestly, I couldn't really tell you. Well, from what I know in Genesis,
then there's no point in having a conversation with you, because you called in to say that the Genesis creation account is true. And when I point out that it doesn't agree with the findings of science, and I ask you how we would tell which one is true, you suggest evidence. And when I say, does the evidence more strongly suggest that the Earth could or could not exist prior to light, or did not exist prior to light, you say you don't have the evidence. That means you haven't even bothered to go through a kindergarten. I'm still talking. You haven't even bothered to go through a kindergarten cursory investigation of the various scientific models of the origin of the universe and compare them to Genesis. So if you haven't done that, how could you possibly have a reasonable conclusion that you've picked the right one?
Okay, let me correct myself. Okay, I know all about like the Big Bang, the expansion of the universe and everything. I know all about. I researched evolution in school. I actually got a B in biology. And that was AP biology too. That was a hard class.
You're getting an F. You're getting an F in this conversation because once again you are avoiding the question.
Okay, what's the question again?
Why should I have to repeat it? Why do I have to do all your work for you, Keto? Which came first, light or the Earth?
I'm sorry, but I have to say the Earth. That's what it says in the Bible. I believe what the Bible says. All right, that's what my God says. That's just the truth. That's the truth to me.
Yeah, that's really sad because first of all, things aren't true for you. They're either true or not true. However,
it's the truth.
No, it's not the truth. It's wrong. You are preferring what you think your God says, even though you have no evidence that your God says it. And if your God says it, your God is wrong. Which came first, the sun or the earth?
Absolutely the earth. Yeah.
That's not even what the Bible says. You can't even get it right.
Sorry, you had me.
You can't even get it right. You can't even get it right according to your Bible. You are an absolute lying fucking troll. Would you just go ahead and say the thing you want to say so that you can prove you're a lying fucking troll? You don't know what the Bible says. No, it's not unfair. It's not unfair, you lying fuck. You lying fuck.
Okay, so we're going to resort to calling you swears. We're going to resort to personal insults. You know what that is?
Oh, swears.
That's ad hominem.
No, it's not. It's not here. Let me mute you. Let me mute you and put your ass on hold because you're a lying fuck. The very beginning of the book, the first fucking words that you're supposed to have studied, you lying fuck, is in the beginning, the God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void. Now, is that at all possible under the scientific models that light could have existed before the earth? Never mind. It doesn't matter. Goodbye. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I got very strong vibes that was not the genuine thing. That I think my my ear has been refined from earlier. That did not strike me as genuine in the slightest.
Yeah, you got a B in AP biology. Congratulations. Nobody asked you a single question about biology. Biology is irrelevant to the earth and the beginning of the cosmos. Biology is relevant when you continue reading and you find out that the Bible has a primitive earth followed by the creation of light, followed by an expanse or atmosphere, then land and land plants. Then it creates the sun. How is it that the sun is created after the earth when science shows that the best model for the formation of planets is an accretion disk from the sun, and that the sun's gravity needs to form this? Your book is in conflict with science. It gets the order wrong. In order for that to work at all, you have to suspend all of physics. And then you have to divide plants up into confusing categories of whether they're land plants or fruiting plants and other things like this. The order of events in the Bible doesn't match with science. And so if the question then becomes, as it was in the call, how do we tell which one of them is right? Our liar suggested that it should be based on evidence. And then our liar said that he believes that the earth was made first because that's what his God says in the Bible. So our liar ignores the evidence, ignores the best understanding of the evidence, ignores the best methods for understanding the evidence, and instead wants to say that he believes it because he is convinced that that's what God said. That's not evidence. That is not following the evidence. That is you reaching a conclusion and ignoring the evidence to the contrary. See, if there was evidence that contradicted evolution by means of natural selection, science would acknowledge it and have to come up with an explanation for it. If there were evidence that conflicted with the current Big Bang cosmological model or the current accretion disk suspicions about the origin of the galaxy, of our solar system, if there were evidence against these models, those models would be suspended in the sense of saying, this was the model. We now have this new information that conflicts with the model. And so we can say this model is no longer necessarily considered right or complete. And we have to come up with a new model that includes this new information. That's the process by which we engage in scientific inquiry. Recently, there was the final experiment where they took some flat earthers and some globe earthers to the South Pole in December. Because if you're at the South Pole in December on a globe that is orbiting on an axis, the sun never sets over a 24-hour period. It just goes in a loop around you. It dips a little. They were able to record it. They were able to observe it. That observation is completely inconsistent with flat Earth models. The scientific model, if we got down to the South Pole and the sun had set, the heliocentric model of our solar system would be overturned. The very notion that we are on a spinning ball on an axial tilt orbiting a sun is conflicted by the direct observation of the sun setting at the South Pole in December. If that's what had been observed, the scientists would have said, holy crap, we've got to rework this model. We can no longer say that our heliocentric model is correct.
Let me guess, the flat earthers came up with an ad hoc explanation which allows them to continue believing in the flat earth despite this evidence which confirms, or rather disconfirms, their take.
Yes. And what the most honest of them have said, especially the guy, the flat earther who was there and observed it, did not abandon flat earth, but did say, I am wrong. The sun does remain in the sky for 24 hours. I will have to go back to the drawing board and find a new model.
My flat earth model.
Yeah. See, this is the problem.
Oh,
Is
it's just
science doesn't say,
unbelievable.
"Oh, we need to go back and find a way to make our globe model fit."
Yep.
It is, our globe model is wrong. Let's see what new model fits with all of the observations. But that's not what flat earthers do, and that's not what creationists do. Creationists, there are countless problems with creationist models. And even a lying troll like that person who desperately wanted to call in so much that they tried 3 different times to get in on the web client, because I think they're afraid that if they call in on their actual cell phone, I will get their number and be able to know who they are the next time they call. We have one caller left. We're going to get to here in just a second. They're calling from an actual telephone. I would love to get rid of the web call interface. Oh, we have 2 calls. But I would love to get rid of the web call interface, and I think 75 to 80% of our trolls would go away if we got rid of that. The problem is, a good chunk of those trolls can still just fake a number.
Yep.
Somebody in chat said, if your God's really on your side, why are callers so scared of Matt? I don't know if they're scared of me or Dara or whatever else. The issue is, we ask really simple questions. If, in fact, you had a flat earth model that was worth a damn, if you had a God model that was worth a damn, a simple question like, how do you tell the difference, would be met by something more specific than just follow the evidence. And if your model was to follow the evidence, when presented with the scientific evidence for something, you could never then say, well, I got to go with the Bible because that's what God said. Because that's not following evidence. Here we go. Let's see what we can get at. Anne is calling in from California. Pronouns are she, her. Could she have always been an atheist even if she was brought up Catholic? Sure. Hey, Anne, how you doing? You're on with Dara and Matt.
Hello, Dara and Matt. It's such an honor. I'm very nervous. My heart, as much as it can pound, is pounding right now.
I'll make it easy. I'll let Dara talk to you, and then, because Dara's not scary at all.
Oh.
I will accept
Okay.
that description. Of the pair of us, Matt is definitely the scarier one, that's for sure.
Okay. Well, I guess my background, obviously, I was born in a large Catholic family. All of us kids were named after saints. You know, typical Catholic, typical baby, taken out of the crib, you know, priest pours water on her head, and, you know, now I'm, without my consent, obviously, I was an infant. So, you know, I was just raised in that religion, and it was really ingrained in me. You know, church every Sunday, CCD every Monday after school. We did rosaries, we did everything. And I just found, like, just my whole life, I'm like, I don't want to do this forever. This doesn't feel right. Also, like, the whole resurrection story never made sense to me. Like, because they would say Jesus died, but he didn't. Because if he got to come back, then that's not death, I don't think. But you know, it didn't make sense. But it's like it's almost like I chose to believe it because I was scared not to believe it. Because I was told to believe it, and I was afraid, like, I would go to hell if I didn't believe it. I mean, they really drill that into you. Except my mother told us about this place called purgatory, if you've ever heard of it.
Yep.
Where, like, people go, after you die, it's like, it's not quite hell. It's like you don't go straight to heaven. You spend some time in purgatory before you go to heaven, and that's what happens to most people. You know, I don't know if she was just saying that to comfort us or whatever, but, you know, I just, as I grew up, just things started making less sense to me. Then there was a big Catholic priest molestation scandal at our old church, and that really turned me off. I'm like, I am never going to confession to those people again, ever. when, they're doing so much worse than I ever done. So that kind of like turned me off. Things, they turn you off. And I'm sorry to be so nervous. And then I just kind of became anti-Catholic for a while, then anti-religion, but it's like I still felt like I believed in God, but then I started wondering, well, what does that mean to believe in God for me? Like, do I really believe that there's someone up there in the sky and they're looking out for me when clearly they weren't? But, because I had what I would consider a near-death experience. I was born with a defective aortic valve, and it almost killed me before I was finally ready to get the aortic valve replacement. And I remember thinking, if only there was a God looking out for me so I could get this operation done. And then I thought, well, if there was really a God looking out for me, maybe I wouldn't have gotten this in the first place. And so then I started thinking about God in that way. And it's just, the more I grew up, the less it made sense. I found the crucifix to be like such a horrifically violent image to look at.
And could I ask, if you were to distill your comments into a question, what is it that you want us to respond to? Because you've said a lot, and I appreciate.
I know.
Speak, and I know you're nervous, and that's totally okay. I'm not putting pressure on you. I was just wondering, what, if anything, is your question? What, if you were to distill what you want us to respond to into a question, into a sentence or two, what is it you would like us to respond to?
I guess it would be just, should I have just not ever really believed it, and I was just pretending?
That's a really difficult question to answer, and because Matt and I don't have access to your mind. Only you do. And the question of what constitutes belief or acceptance of a proposition is a complicated one as well. It depends on definitions and so on. Some people will say, I'm thinking, some people will say somebody believes something so long as they say they do. And that's a fair model, because if you push against that and you say, well, you don't really believe, you're at risk of committing a no true Scotsman fallacy. And that's a whole complicated avenue we could go down. Others will say that you believe something if it is evident in your behavior. I'm reminded of Jordan Peterson, and he'll say, as he did to Matt on stage in that now infamous debate, you're not really an atheist because you're too good to be an atheist. In other words, a true atheist would be like Raskolnikov from Crime and Punishment, i.e. a murderer. So it depends on the definitions you're using, but really and truly, I can't get access to your mental state, and you're best placed to decide whether or not you believed in it. I suppose the only question I would ask you is, do you believe it now? Like, do you believe in God now? And if not, why is it that you're wrestling with whether or not you believed it when you were still living at home or whatever it is? I'm just curious why this is causing you such a concern, really.
Well, I guess I would say that I believe because it was all I knew.
Yeah.
So maybe going through this problem, maybe I was a believer who became a non-believer, but I'm not like the most highly educated, smartest person. I barely graduated high school. But it just stopped making sense. Like, the more I questioned things, the less sense it made. Like, people, oh, you're going to go to hell. And then I would think, well, how can hell hurt me if I'm dead? I'm dead. And then I thought about heaven. I'm like, okay, well, how can heaven give me any pleasure or happiness if I'm dead? Like, dead is dead to me. And then I thought, my idea of, if you want to call it heaven, is just like nothing. Like, I hope there's nothing after we die. So I guess what I'm saying is, maybe I did believe. Maybe after talking with you, maybe I did believe because it was all I knew. But then as I kind of grew up and got up out in the world a little bit and experienced things, and just it started making less sense. And like, things happening in the Catholic Church, like that one incident that I told you about.
I will say on that, and
yeah.
rather controversially, I will push back on that just slightly.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I totally see how abuses in the Catholic Church could turn somebody off of the Catholic Church as an institution,
Yeah.
but just with a
Mhm.
view to, I don't think that would be a good argument to use for atheism. It's entirely consistent
Right.
with the existence of God that there is an immoral institution, namely the Catholic Church, that
Yeah.
abused children, right? And I'm not disputing the facts of the abuse. I'm from Ireland, where that abuse was rife, so I don't need to be illuminated on the grotesqueries that reside in that
Yeah.
whole debacle.
Right. Right.
Debacle feels like an understatement. I do not wish to dismiss it or belittle it. It is obscene what occurred, but that wouldn't be a good argument. Basically, pedophile priest scandal, therefore atheism, is actually a non sequitur. So I would just urge caution on deploying that as a reason for your atheism. But I can certainly see that as a reason to abandon the Catholic Church as an institution, or to lose your trust in the hierarchy of the church and so on, because of priests being
Right.
moved around to different parishes so that they might continue their despicable acts and so on. So that's just one area I would urge some caution. But aside from that, it sounds and like you used to be a believer, and for a plethora of reasons you're no longer a believer. And I wish you all the best. I don't know what else I can say in response, unless you have another question.
Well, yeah, I did have one other question. I was wondering if there's any particular denomination of Christianity or any other religion that like turns out more atheists than all the others.
What do you mean turns out more atheists?
Well, more people like come from that religion that like kind of turn atheist, whether through education or deconstruction. Like, is there one institution, like one religious institution, where the most people become atheists after being, is like one more than any other? I'm so sorry, I don't have proper language.
Presumably, most people who deconvert and become atheists, this is just pure stab in the dark, just to be clear, presumably, just going on the statistics, presumably most people who become atheist after having been theist will have been Christian, but that's only because Christians are the majority faith on the planet. I think there's 3 billion Christians out of the 8 billion people on the planet, about 2 billion Muslims, about between 1.5, 1.8 billion Hindus or something like that. So look, I'm just stabbing in the dark. I don't have statistics in front of me, nor have I looked into that topic, but
okay.
I'm not sure. Did you look something up there, Matt? Is there any data on that?
The website that I used to look at ages ago no longer exists and hasn't since, I guess the last update was in 2024, but prior to that, there were some updates in 2016. I'm not aware of any statistics on any particular religious denomination or structure or group that tends to produce more atheists, nor would it matter. If, in fact, we found it a curiosity, like, the overwhelming majority of atheists that used to be Christians were Catholic, like at a percentage that, is much greater than the percentage of Catholics. So far as I know, my default assumption is that there's a normative distribution that the same, apart from a few religious cults where the only way out is to die. And the ones that are more oppressive and allow fewer people to escape. Like, I would say there are probably, and I haven't gone and looked at statistics, probably fewer ex-Muslims per capita than there are per ex-Christians per capita that are atheists. I think that's changing, if in fact my suspicion is correct. But to whatever extent that's true, it's because Islamic regimes are oppressive, and you don't end up with the freedom to even have that as an option. In the same way that, you know, you're a woman. I don't. You're probably not old enough, but in my mom's living memory, there was a period of time where my mom couldn't own a house, couldn't have a credit card without my dad co-signing it. She couldn't have a bank account. And in my grandma's lifetime also, couldn't vote. And so if you think about what it was like for women before they could vote, before they could have bank accounts, before they could get a car, before they get that, there were the divorce rate was lower. Not just because many of them were prevented by their religious traditions from getting divorced, but because if they got divorced, they couldn't live their fucking life. They had no control over anything. The divorce rate goes up, not because society became more corrupt, but because society permitted freedom and equality such that women are now real fucking people who can live their life and do the things that everybody should be able to do. And so if we see a difference in people falling away from religions and banning them, it's probably too soon to make any sort of assessment. And right now, and maybe forever, it wouldn't really matter much, because even if most people left Catholicism more than, you know, Methodist, it doesn't mean that Methodist is any more true or any better.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Just maybe worse at marketing.
Yeah. No. No, that makes sense. Because I'm, you know, like I keep saying, I'm not the most educated, and I can't always find the right language to express, you know, what I'm feeling. But you guys have been so helpful, and I'm so thankful to both of you.
You did really well, Anne. Don't sell yourself short. Don't sell yourself short. You did really well. You spoke really well. Good job.
Okay. Well, I hear a lot of theists all the time, and they want to say, you know, God, you know, but no two of them can describe God the same way, really. And then you don't need proof, but they always refer to God as a he. But how do they know? Like, if they can't describe their God, how do they know it even has a gender? You know, things like that.
Oh, I hear you.
Yeah.
But you don't have to put yourself in their category, because you're not a theist.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I like being an atheist. It works for me.
There you go.
Yeah.
And what's funny is, even if you didn't like it, it might still be the case that there's no good reason to believe in a God. So you'd be stuck being an atheist, even if it was absolutely fucking miserable.
That's so true. Oh my goodness. That's so true.
Sometimes the truth sucks, Anne.
Yeah.
Yes,
however,
it does. It does. It does. I've really been enjoying your YouTube shows. Ever since the election, I've been so despondent, and these have really helped me. So
good.
Awesome. Well, I'm thrilled that anything we've said or done has been beneficial to you and or anybody else. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking my call. I'm so happy I got to talk to you guys.
Thanks,
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Anne. Keep asking questions. That's the way to actually learn stuff.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anne.
Bye-bye.
All right. Our final call, perhaps, we'll see. There may be somebody else. Allison's an atheist calling with a question about, I guess somebody's trying to come after your atheist husband. What's going on?
Okay, so first again, hi. I'm a first-time caller and a first-time listener. So my husband's sister recently found out that both me and him are atheists, and she is extremely religious, but she is also mentally handicapped. She is approaching 60, but has the mental capacity of about a 7-year-old. She told my husband that due to him not believing in God anymore, she doesn't want him or on her life insurance policy. My husband has no issue with being removed as long as the money is used to what it was intended for, which would be his sister's funeral expenses. However, she has been very spiteful and malicious in conversation with him since, and we wanted advice on how to deal with her.
It sounds like you need to speak to a legal professional.
Well, I'm confused. You're asking about how she decides to dispose of her money?
No, okay, so it's basically like she has been very like nasty to my husband.
Don't care. I don't care.
during,
Allison, I don't care. I need to know what. So you have a sister who wants to remove a sister-in-law wants who to remove your husband from a life insurance thing? Hello?
Well, I mean, yeah, but I mean,
No, you can't say yeah. I'm asking, oh my gosh, I'm asking for clarity. Whose life insurance are we talking about?
my sister-in-law. But
Hang on. It's your sister-in-law's life insurance policy, right?
Yes.
And your sister-in-law wants to remove someone else from being a beneficiary on her life insurance policy?
Yes. Ah, okay.
Shit. It's
yeah,
none of your
strike my
business.
comment from the record. Yeah, strike my comment. I completely misunderstood the opening there.
If it's my life insurance policy, I get to exclude or include whoever the fuck I want. It doesn't matter what an asshole I've been to somebody or anything else. Why are you worried about this?
Well, okay, so his mom died recently, and the reason why she placed him as the reason why his name is on the life insurance policy is because she made him the beneficiary. So because she wanted to make sure that all of his sister's funeral expenses were taken care of.
So somebody's mom died and left money to your sister-in-law. Yeah. So there's money been left to your sister-in-law, right?
No.
Oh my God.
This is why I got confused.
Oh, my husband's here. Hold on.
Okay, so I apologize. This is Allison's husband. So my mother had set up the life insurance policy for my sister because she's mentally deficient. I was placed as the beneficiary to make sure that the money was used specifically for my sister's funeral expenses in the event that she passes away. I'm not really concerned about being removed. I just want to make sure getting added when they remove me knows that is what that money is to be used for. Because me and my sister may not share the same belief, but I don't want to see her in a cardboard box in a 3-foot hole.
Call a lawyer. Call a lawyer.
But I mean, basically, the question is,
call a lawyer.
Ever since she found out that
call
I'm an atheist, she's been very rude and mean.
Call a lawyer. Call a fucking lawyer. How many times do I have to say it before you get it? The atheism is irrelevant. The money that your mom left may be irrelevant. All of these things you're bringing up are irrelevant, but definitely, it's 1,000% irrelevant. Me and fucking Dara and the people watching this show. Go call a lawyer. Goodbye. What a shit way to end. Oh, I'd really like your thoughts and on this. I think it's none of your fucking business. And you should call a lawyer. Well, but she needs this, and I want to make sure it does. It's none of my fucking business. It's nobody here's business. It sounds like you've got some internal family drama and some confusion, and you're worried about your sister-in-law. Congratulations. I'm glad you're worried about your sister-in-law. Call a fucking lawyer. You wanted the advice. That's the advice. Because the lawyer will either tell you A, you have a good reason in a case and we can proceed, or B, mind your own fucking business. It's too late. If my grandma left money to my mom that was intended by my grandma to eventually come to me, and my mom decides to not leave me any or not make me a beneficiary because I'm an atheist, you know what that is? Tough fucking luck. You don't get to sit there and say, well, that's not what grandma wanted. Well, grandma's fucking dead. Grandma should have taken steps to make sure that what she wanted was better protected. My goodness. I mean, I'm fine with you saying, hey, I'd like some advice, but how many times can I say the same fucking thing? It's absolutely wild. Dara, that was the last call. I'm sorry.
Please don't apologize to me. Goodness.
So
look at
I
the
will
draw.
say, there's we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. The schedule that's in front of me is that tonight on the Sunday show at 7:00 Central, which is 2.5 hours from now, Forrest Valkai and Eric from Skeptics and Scoundrels will be on here. Maybe you can call, and they won't tell you to call a lawyer. Maybe they'll tell you that you can magically influence your sister-in-law's legal power without a lawyer. But they, in order to say that, they'd have to be living in magical McFucking fairyland, because right now the law is doing this. Tomorrow night in Skeptalk at 6 p.m. Central is going to be Forrest Valkai and Rob Palmer. Tuesdays, Chewed Gum is Alyssa and Eve. Wednesdays, Hang Up. I don't currently have a guest, but we will have it sorted out by then. And Thursday's Transatlantic Call-In Show is going to be Arden and Jose Caballero. Huge thank you to Stephanie for screening, for Morgan for getting the show up and running. And my apologies for the slow technical issue that started a slight delay in getting the show started. On that note, the biggest thank you right now, Dara, you done 2 shows this week, but you're finishing early. What are you going to do for the rest of the day? It's not 4 a.m.
It's not 4 a.m. It is, however, coming up on 11 p.m. and I have to go teach lessons in the morning. So I'll actually be going to bed quite soon, believe it or not. My evening consists of going to bed. So yeah, my life is a roller coaster of excitement.
All right. I see now that Morgan had sent me a note, and had I read it, the answer would have been no. But on that note, thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you for participating in the show. You can call into any of the other shows here on the line. And as a reminder, the line is a podcast starting January 20th. You can go to patreon.com/calltheline to find out more information there. You can also go to linemerch.com to order and support the show. You can like and subscribe and do all that stuff. And I know that since none of you have anything worth doing for the next couple of hours, that you're going to get food, recharge yourself, and then come back to the Sunday show after dark in 2.5 hours.